So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining once again, Chatter Up. Appreciate you all coming out. I think most of the people I recognize here. Rob, I see you're on. Welcome. We'll get to you. Thanks for joining us, of course. Is anyone here, just by show of hands, first time joining us on the call? All right, cool. I see Bob, Danny, anyone else? Let's see. Anyone else new? Just two new people. Oh yeah, Yuriko and Aiko. All right, well, welcome to you first timers. So the plan for today, I just want to introduce a few people before getting to Rob Fitz, and we'll do the NPB update with Michael Westbay, of course, a couple announcements about upcoming Chatter Up episodes and more, and then we'll get to the discussion with Rob, which I'm hoping can be, I have some questions prepared, but I hope you all came prepared to talk as well, because I want this to be a conversation, just kind of like how a book club might be in person. So moving on to a couple introductions here. First of all, a little sneak peek. Yuriko, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to put you in the spotlight real quick. Yuriko Romer, thank you for joining us. Yuriko is a filmmaker that is working on a movie about Japanese baseball right now, and she's going to join us on an upcoming Chatter Up. So welcome, Yuriko. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me, and
You're
looking
welcome.
forward to engaging.
Unfortunately,
I can't stay very long today because I have to be somewhere else shortly, but
no problem. That's why I wanted to make sure that I said hi, because I knew you might have to jump off, which is no problem at all. The other person who I wanted to introduce is Johnny Tancredi. Johnny, are you here? Yeah, there you are. Yeah, you're on mute right now.
There we go.
Hey, Johnny. Welcome. Johnny has a podcast called the Caught Looking Podcast. It's a sports collecting and baseball podcast. I'm going to be recording an episode with him next week, and I encourage all of you, especially you collectors, check out the Caught Looking Podcast. It's a pretty cool show. So, Johnny, welcome. And let's see. So, two more guys. I don't see Clay here. I want to talk to Clay. I don't think Clay can join today. But pretty excited. We have a couple guys from Northwestern University, journalism students there that are helping me out with some things. The first one is Coop Daly. Hey, Coop. There he is in his Cubs. They're both Cubs fans. And they're journalism students at Northwestern, which is the best, they would say, and I think a lot of other people would say, journalism school in the U.S., and they're going to help create some content. With Coop and Andy, who I'll get to in a second here, are helping me out this summer. And they're going to have some cool stuff for you, some articles and online content. So welcome to Coop. And then Andy, there he is. Andy is another Northwestern student, as I mentioned. And he does a little more of the on-screen stuff. Like he's does the kind of Northwestern sports report and stuff. So he's going to help with some of our video stuff, including this call. So he's a co-host of this call, and he's going to be helping out with a few things. He's going to be monitoring the chat. So if Andy jumps in and says anything, don't be alarmed. He's not trying to take over the call. He has I vest all the powers in him. So welcome to you both, and thanks for working with us. They mentioned the chat. I think most of you probably know it's at the bottom there. Please go ahead and introduce yourself. And I always say where you're from. So maybe we'll say, let us know your favorite baseball book in the chat today. I think the one that comes to mind for me is The Catcher Was a Spy. That book was pretty fascinating. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that story, but yeah, so I'm Shane Barclay, Catcher is a Spy. If you all want to put it in the chat, your name and favorite baseball book, just so we can see where everyone, just a little interest bit of every person on the call. So All right. That being said, we're about to go to Michael with the NPB update. But before we do that, I had a little poll that we wanted to run. Andy's putting it up right now. It should be popping up. Which baseball league will you follow most closely in 2020? NPB, MLB, KBO, CPBL. If there's another one in there that I'm missing, I know there's a lot, you can put it in the chat. But, I know this is a Japanese baseball focus here. And I also know a lot of you are primarily MLB fans and have adopted Japanese baseball. But I'm just kind of curious what the ratio is here of people who are predominantly NPB fans versus MLB or anything else. I'm looking at the results live here. Looks like most of you have voted, and NPB is in first place. That's cool. That's good to see. I was thinking maybe MLB would be in second. We have 35 of 39 votes. You can go ahead and close it, Andy. I think that's a good enough idea. So NPB was at 49%, MLB 43%. All right, Michael, that's good. I was worried MLB was going to be first, and then we're going to go to you with the NPB update. But I'm glad that Japan is in first place here. So that being said, thanks for your participation in that. I just thought it'd be interesting to know. And Michael, I'm going to put you on the spotlight here and jump to you.
Okay, the main news this past week has been the NPB has outlined how they are going to be reopening the stadiums to fans coming in. They're going to start having allowing up to 5,000 fans into the stadiums starting July 10th. The Chibalote Marines have actually posted all of the requirements on their ticketing site. And the one that involves most of you the most is that you will not be permitted if you are coming into the country for 14 days. So that's just what the rule is right now. Things may change over the next couple of months, but that is certainly something that is going to have to be factored into people's travel plans if they plan on coming. Other common sense ones are you have to wear a mask, they take your temperature at the gates. It looks like they have a questionnaire that you fill out to make sure that you haven't had a fever, runny nose, cough, that sort of thing before attending, but it's all fairly straightforward. And otherwise, baseball is going on here in Japan. It's great to see the Bay Stars winning. Oh, they made it to second place. Yeah, and the big news yesterday was Wheeler of the Tohoku Rakuten Golden Eagles has been traded to the Giants for a young pitcher named Ikeda. So I think that about wraps it up for this week.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, that's good to hear they're having fans in already, or they have a plan in place. So I'm sure we're all following that closely. And unfortunately for Americans, it's not looking so bright. But we'll see. We'll keep our fingers crossed and keep our 6 feet too in the meantime to try to get Japan to let us in, or at least the NPB to let us in. So speaking of future chatter ups, just a couple announcements. Andy's going to share his screen here. So I mentioned Yuriko. Thursday, July 9th, we're going to talk about her film, Diamond Diplomacy. It's a documentary that's in the works right now. Yuriko is an award-winning documentarian. She made a documentary called Mrs. Judo that's about judo and is really successful in the documentary world and film festival world. And this next film is going to be really amazing. And Rob plays a big part of it, as well as a lot of other prominent Japanese baseball figures. And it's really going to be kind of a definitive overview that I'm not sure exists anywhere else on the Japanese game. And it focuses a little bit on the US-Japan relations and how those are affected by their shared love of baseball. So that's going to be our next one, Thursday, July 9th. There's a chance we may have to sneak one in there because our next guest that we have confirmed, just not with a date yet, is Sandy Alderson. Sandy, we're working on confirming the date, but he told me that he'd be happy to join us. He's mostly known for his success in Major League Baseball as the GM of the Mets and the A's. He's been to 4 World Series. He won the 1989 title with the A's, including 3 consecutive World Series. And he's the CEO of the Padres. He was the Executive of the Year in 2015 when the Mets went to the World Series. But the reason why I was interested to bring him on is that when he worked at the commissioner's office, he did a lot of work in international baseball. He was instrumental in helping getting baseball into the Olympics with major league players. And he also worked in the Dominican Republic on cleaning up some of the issues that happened internationally. And so he has a lot of knowledge just across a whole wide range of topics, especially on the international side of things. So that'll be fun to talk to. He also was my teacher in college and hired me for my first baseball job. So that's a little bit of the connection there, but it's going to be a good one. And I'll let you know as soon as I have the date confirmed on that. Moving on to today's episode. So of course we have Rob Fitz here. He's written a bunch of books. Here's 4 of them. The 2 that you see up in front, Issei Baseball and an illustrated introduction to Japanese baseball cards, are his 2 most recent ones. We're going to get more into Rob's credentials in a minute here, but I wanted to make sure you all knew robfitz.com is where you can buy his books and learn more about Rob's story. Really all of his books are amazing. And I know on the chat, there's going to be, any of these books could be in the chat as favorite baseball books. So check him out online at robfitz.com. Thank you, Andy. All right, so that being said, let's move on to Rob. And so Rob, I'm just gonna put you on spotlight for a second here so everyone can see you, so you don't have to be staring at yourself. So Rob Fitz, just to give everyone an idea of a little bit about your history. So he has a doctorate in archaeology from Brown University, but Rob left academics to undig something of another nature, which is Japanese baseball history. And he's written 6 books now, and his first book in the subject at hand today, of course, is Remembering Japanese Baseball, an Oral History of the Game. That was the winner of the 2005 Sporting News-SABR Award for Best Baseball Research. He is the founder of SABR's Asian Baseball Committee, and he's won various awards from that organization for Best Baseball Book, the Baseball Research Award, the Oral Research Presentation Award, and much more. He's spoken at such venues as the Library of Congress, Cooperstown Hall of Fame, the Japanese Embassy, and now to that prestigious list we add JapanBall's Chatter Up. So Rob, we are very happy to have you here, and thanks so much for joining us.
So it's great to be here, Shane. It's great to see everybody. I scrolled through the list while Shane was talking, and I think I know about a third of you pretty well. A bunch of you I met via email this week and last week because you ordered my book, so thank you. I noticed, Ian, you're here. Did you get your book yet? You were the last one to order. You just do thumbs up if you got it. Thumbs down. Okay, so you have to fake it, I guess, tonight.
Yeah, well, Rob, thanks again. I think it's a real treat to have you here. Also impressive shelf you got back there. That's pretty awesome. But
yeah, it's my toys.
Yeah, nice. So I just wanted to kind of kick things off with about the beginnings of how you got into all of this. In the book's intro, you explain how in 1993, I believe, you went to your first game and first Japanese game and fell in love with the Japanese baseball. And I think a lot of people on this call have a similar origin story of why they love Japanese baseball. But the difference between us and you is that, you've written more than a handful of books on the subject, and I've really taken it to the next level. So I guess, did you envision any of this when you wrote your first book, or even going back before that, like when you started first following the game? Was there a seedling of what might become of your life?
No, not at all. When I first started, I was just a fan, and was very passionate about archaeology, and I was a baseball fan on the side. Probably like most of the people watching today have their jobs, and it's just a hobby. But when I was over there in 93, 94, there wasn't much written in English, and I was interested in the history, so I had to go out and find it myself, and that led to this book when I started talking to Wally Yonamine and subsequent players. And it wasn't really until I was almost done this book, and I said to my wife, this is what I want to do. It was a lot more fun than archaeology, which is a pretty fun field anyway. And I just decided before I even finished the first one, I was going to start a second. So from there on out, it just kind of happened. Once I decided to go professional writer, it was always what's going to be next, even before I finished the book I'm working on at the time.
Got it. Well, we're all very grateful that you dedicated the last 20 years or 15 years to this project, and we look forward to continuing to see the products that you put out. So that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. If anyone wants to ask the first question, please do. You can either see, Susan has her hand up, so we're just going to go straight to Susan. All right, Susan, you're up. Hi.
Hi, Rob. How's it going?
Hi, Susan. Doing well, thanks.
Good. Congratulations on the 15th anniversary of publishing Remembering Japanese Baseball.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did the math correctly. So I know that you wrote a full book about Wally Yonamine after Remembering Japanese Baseball, and you guys were friends up until he passed away in 2011. Were you able to establish relationships with your other interviewees from the first book, or did you keep in touch with them? I know a few are still alive, but have you kept in touch with the ones who are still living?
I did not at the time. At the time, Wally and I, of course, went right into working on the next book and became very friendly. And a few of the players in Remembering, like Takashi Ueda, I saw again. I went to Hawaii a couple of times to interview Wally and his family, and I would go out to lunch with Dick. But most of the other players, the answer is no. The exception was Mashi. And Mashi and I actually fell out of touch between Remembering and the day we spent together to do that, and a few years later when I went to write his biography, and we had to remind him who I was and that he had actually met me before. And that took a while to convince Mashi to work with me. And now we're in touch often.
Cool. Duff, I saw you had a question, so I'm just going to put you on if you'll, you're eating there, but I'm going to put you on and you can just ask Rob the question yourself.
Yes, I sent out the cards, Duff.
Thank you. I apologize. You want the other cards back?
No, keep them. I hope you get a great insert.
Thank you. Your book was written 15 years ago. At the end of each vignette, at the end of each interview, each of them has suggestions on how to improve Japanese baseball, especially like the ones from Moshi. To the best of your knowledge, do you know if any of those have been implemented? If people speaking in your book was responsible for any of the changes in Japanese baseball?
I'm sure my book had no effect on Japanese baseball. It was only done in English. I don't think very many people read it in Japanese, of course. Some of the players, such as Mori, who is a pretty big name in Japanese baseball, may have taken his ideas and already been talking to people in power. And some of it just came naturally. I think a lot of the American players said as long as we only have 2 or 3 foreign players per team, Japanese baseball will never develop to its full strength. And of course, they've increased the numbers of foreigners now. And what excites me about Japanese baseball now is I think their game has developed a different way than in the U.S. I wonder if a lot of you saw the MLB Japanese All-Star games, was it 2 years ago at the end of the season, where Japan came back, played small ball, and beat the U.S. And they were really exciting games. And that's the way I remember baseball from when I was a kid. You know, a lot of stealing, great timely hits, and not just the walks, the strikeouts, and the home runs. So I'm finding Japanese baseball now to be a little bit more exciting than MLB, which was not the case in the 90s. In the 90s, Japanese baseball was very slow. So I think it's naturally progressed and developed.
Yeah, I know when we had Bobby Valentine on last time, he alluded to a few things that were, things that he was pushing for that were really slow to implement. Some people, actually, I think in your book, someone said that they feel the Japanese game maybe takes like 10 years longer for certain things to implement, maybe decades more in some cases. But, it seems like some of the things that American players are saying will probably never be fully implemented, but they start to implement just a few, aspects of it, like especially with the rest and whatnot, with the pitchers and the training and understanding physiologically how the body needs rest.
Yeah.
But I thought that was one of the interesting themes of the book, and you can't really talk about Japanese baseball without talking about the practice regimens. And I thought it was kind of funny how spring training was either the hottest place in the world or the coldest place in the world. It's like they have to create the most uncomfortable situation possible. And it just interesting how like it didn't matter if it didn't quite make sense from a performance standpoint. It really just, the practicing is what matters, and the process matters even more so than the result in some cases.
I'd love to see how much has changed over the 15 years. And of course, it takes a few years to write a book. So my book ends, I think it's about the year 2000 or so, is the last player who played in my book. It's been 20 years since the last player really talked about what it's like. And I'd love to be able to talk about some of the players now and try to get an update. And might be an interesting project down the road.
Yeah, that would be a new edition, maybe with another handful of. Gabe's got a question, so we're going to go to Gabe here. Hey, Gabe.
Hi, Shane. Hello, Rob. How you doing?
Hi there. Doing well, thanks.
I didn't get the book in time, but I do have your copy of Introduction to Japanese Baseball Cards, your ebook that you released around the same time as this Chatter Up was announced.
Right.
And I got to the page about the U.S. issued Japanese baseball card sets from the 70s and 80s. And I'd like to know, what was the rationale for why those were even produced? I didn't think there would be much of a market at that time. There's maybe one now, but I'd like to hear more about that, please.
You know, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. How's that for a fast answer? But I think we can find out. The person who ran TCMA is still around, and I can certainly get in touch with him and ask him why they thought of producing that set in 1979. And that's a wonderful question. I think I'm going to get on it tomorrow morning and see what I can find out, so I can put it in the next edition of the baseball card book.
I will direct message you my email because I'm eager to hear.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for the question. It's great.
Going off that, it looks like Robert has a question about Japanese baseball cards. Robert, do you want to ask your question?
Who, me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, about the TCMA set, I remember, I'll ask you a question, but about the TCMA set, they had such a hard time selling it that they went, I think originally they were selling them for $10 per set. And by the end of the year, they were selling them 10 for $10, like $1 a set. Because, you know, I guess TCMA really underestimated, what people would buy over here. I think that a lot of that had to do with Ed Broder, because he did all the pictures, and then he became famous later on for other things. But he made Broder made some great sets. The Mets tour, the Hiroshima Carp, a lot of those cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an interesting character. But anyway, the question I had: what were the first Japanese cards you collected?
So the very first Japanese card I remember very well. I was a kid, probably 11 years old, and back then there was one show in Philly. It's called The Philly Show. It's once a year, and it was one of the few shows on the East Coast. I think New York also had a show, and I'm pretty sure that was it back in the 70s. And I remember, and I'm a kid, so I might have had $20, to spend for the entire day. And in one of the commons bins, or unusual card bins, I found what I now know is a 1957 Yamakatsu Benko. But at the time, I had no idea what it was. It was just so unusual. It was beautiful. I bought it. And somebody wrote the Japanese player's name across the front. They got it wrong. They actually picked some fictional Chinese name. But so I thought for 20 years, I thought I had a different player. So once I knew I was going to Japan, I knew I wanted to find out more about this set and see if I could collect it. And this is long before the guides came out. And this is back in the early 90s when you were collecting Japanese cards. You just kind of went to a antique show or a flea market and hoped there was some there, and you bought whatever was on the floor. But I was lucky enough to find the rest of that set. It took a long time, though.
Great, thank you.
Ian Razor had a kind of a generic question, but an interesting one nonetheless. So Ian, in the Simpsons room, what's your question for Rob?
So I'm sure you know Jason Ripper.
Oh my gosh, yes, of course.
He was my history teacher at Everett Community College.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Miami Smith was actually running the Japanese program there, and I took Japanese classes there as well.
That is great. For those who don't know, which is everybody else in this chat room, Jason Ripper is my brother-in-law. So.
And he told me about you because I'm a big baseball fan, so I actually did read some of Remembering Japanese Baseball, but that was 10 years ago, so I remember nothing. But just what changes would you make to MPB? Would you get rid of the gaijin limit, stuff like that?
In the perfect world where I'm in charge and all I do is think about baseball, I would get rid of the gaijin rule. I would impose a international playoff system and World Series. I would like to model it after European soccer, where the best teams in the world, whether they be the Yankees, the Tokyo Giants, the Hiroshima Carp, whatever, are full international teams. And that there's not really a disparity of talent between the leagues. In my perfect world, that would be it. But that's never going to happen.
I like those ideas. The true World Series would be awesome too. I want to go to Jonathan Greenberg has his hand raised. So Jonathan, I'll go to you.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, Jonathan.
How are you?
Yep. Good.
So the question that we have, I thought about the writer Haruki Murakami wrote about a story called The Night I Became a Novelist, which talks about opening day, 1978, Swallows against the Carp. And he remembers Dave Hilton and the exact moment that he realized that he wanted to write about things and for a living. I'm wondering if you could share with us your exact origin story and like what do you remember about that day?
This is the origin story of my love of Japanese baseball.
Yeah.
I can because I just reread my introduction a couple days ago. So I remember the story really well. A lot of people probably read it if they got the book in time, but it happened my first night in Japan. I traveled over, I did the 12-hour, 13-hour trip. I didn't sleep on the plane at all. I was exhausted. I show up in the hotel room, take a quick shower, and my wife, who's already there, comes back from the office and says, hey, we got baseball tickets. Let's go. Off we go to Jingu Stadium. We saw the Hanshin Tigers versus the Swallows, and they're in the middle of a pennant race, and that place was rocking. The whole stadium was shaking as the bands were playing and people were, using the umbrellas and going up and down with them, and the balloons were crazy. It was just crazy. I was also sleep deprived, so I was probably kind of having a bit of an outer body experience. But wow, I couldn't believe baseball could be this exciting. So that's the day I became a Japanese baseball fanatic. And I think even the next day, I went out looking for Japanese baseball cards, and I found the Tokyo Dome.
Great.
And
Thanks.
And how about, and then from there, at what point did you decide that you want to embark on a book?
That was many years later. I mean, that was 2000. In 2000, I started an online baseball card shop, Rob's Japanese Baseball Cards. I think it's just Rob's Japanese Cards, actually. And before eBay, I had a website, and I had to convince Americans that they wanted to buy Japanese baseball cards. So what I started doing is writing little biographies of the great stars, just short 500,000 word pieces. And that led to as much research as I could do back then. And that led me eventually to Wally Yonamine, because he was a man who was in the Hall of Fame in Japan. He had played with the best players, and he was fluent in English. So he could tell me stories that I could record. And that's, of course, what led to remembering, and then on to the career writing.
Got it. Eric Peterson, I'm going to go to you because I saw you had a question in the chat. Eric.
Hey, Rob, thanks for doing this. In reading the book, I came across the chapter on Darryl Spencer and just kind of saw his style of play, I guess, especially breakup slides and how that really wasn't a thing in Japanese baseball. But then he also has, he talks about really, almost being able to flip a switch and become a better player because of the caliber of play and, some of his antics, like running straight to the bullpen or playing, pulling on people's pants and stuff like that. I guess thinking of, the American old-time game, like kind of more stuffy and proper and not, well, maybe not proper, but that stuff would somewhat be frowned upon. I guess, how was that received over there?
That's a great question. It was received by the fans very well, because Japanese baseball was always really kind of stuffy. And so to have somebody break the mold and do things that the Japanese players wouldn't do was great. The fans loved it. And for those of you who've lived in Japan, I can see Michael up here in the left-hand corner, gaijin get away with a lot. And once you're there a while, that's a survival tool. You can misbehave on purpose and get what you want, whereas if you're following the Japanese rules, the answer is no. If you start to goof around and you look, they're like, yeah, just go do it. Get out of my hair. So I would say, I don't know if Spencer's teammates or his manager appreciated a lot of his behavior, but the fans loved it. And gaijin have always been able to get away with a lot in Japan while they're producing. As soon as they start to go into a slump, then it changes and their antics aren't appreciated.
Interesting. Hey, Mark, I saw you have your hand raised, so I'll go to you. Hey, Mark.
Hi. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Hey, Mark.
How you doing? Rob and I know each other from SABR conventions. Rob, when I was first there in 2010, my wife Lynn had a friend who still has a friend who lives in Japan, and we went in. We tried to go into different types of stores to see if they had tabletop or computer-based baseball games like Stratomatic or the old Catico All-Star baseball game. I wonder if if they have those there, or if they used to have those. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, they did. they started developing these tabletop baseball games, I think as early as 49 is the first one I have. These were insert cards. I talk about it a little bit in my illustrated introduction to Japanese baseball. They go out of fashion in the late 50s and the 60s. In the late 1970s to the 80s, there's a game called Takara, which is it's a lot like Stratomatic. You roll dice, you look on the back. The results are based on the stats of the individual players. And that lasted from 1978 all the way to 1997, I believe. And since then, they've developed a whole bunch of other games, all dice card games. Their cards have always, pretty much always, with a couple exceptions, but most of them have were picture cards with the stats on the back, but the collectible players. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. Now, of course, they have, I understand, incredible video games to play, but I've never gotten into them.
Thank you, Rob.
And Gabe just put in the chat as far as video game or computer games, Out of the Park Baseball. Apparently, their NPB scouting info is very accurate, especially in the most recent one. So, for those of you who are into that, that could be an interesting Japanese game. Bob, let's see, Bob Lapidus.
Yeah.
Hey,
I have a
hey,
question.
Bob.
Hey, hi. First time caller, long time listener. So my first question for Rob is, do you recognize the card behind me?
Yes.
Okay, that's a joke. Hey, Rob, when you were doing Remembering Japanese Baseball, were there, did you have a wish list and any interesting stories about players you almost got and wanted to get and couldn't get at the last minute, or a funny story about the players you weren't able to get that you wanted?
That's a great question, Bob. It's funny. You know, Bob and I actually spoke for an hour this afternoon on the telephone, and he goes, "Hey, is there any questions you want me to ask?" I'm like, "No," but that's like a really great question. I should have thought of that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. So once I get the idea for the book, I call up Wally Yonamine. Actually, I call up his son, Paul, who's kind of at that time, kind of his manager, as well as Paul at his own job as well. And I said, there's this list of players I really want to talk to. They are Sadahara O, Shigeo Nagashima, Masashi Kaneda, Isao Harimoto, you know, all the greats. And he just kind of laughed and said, well, we'll do our best. They all said no. And I then had to I said I wanted to talk to some Hall of Famers, and they got me a few. There's a few in the book. But what I found out very quickly was it's not the stars that are the best interviews, it's the utility players. The stars have their stories memorized. They're used to being in front of the camera, basically talking a lot, not saying much. Utility guys, they have the stories because they're sitting on the bench and they're watching. And they're like sucking it all in. So they're the ones who give the good stories about the other players and what it was like. Because in a way, it's more meaningful for them. The other thing that I was surprised at was I'm just finished an interview with a Japanese player, a retired fellow. He's probably in his 70s. And my translator's like, so you got his cab money? I'm like, what? Cab money? And they're like, yeah, you know, it's traditional to give them an envelope with cab money so they don't have to pay their way home after the interview. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. What do I got? Well, the tradition is $200. I'm like, what? All the Japanese ball players expected cab money of $200 for every interview. And that was quite a surprise for me. And then they would sometimes bring their friends. And sometimes you'd have to provide cab money for both of them because they make a point of saying, well, I'm going this way and I'm going that way. And you'd have to sneak back into the hotel room, because that's where I was doing it at, get some envelopes and stick some cash in there. So that was the surprise I had when I was doing this book.
Wow. That's quite a surprise to get, but a good one to know. Good one for me to know, too.
I never made my money back, by the way, on this book.
Well, I'm glad that we had some people buy it in the past week. Maybe
Yeah,
we start to chip away at that.
Cab money, yeah.
I was interested just in the first chapter about Cappy Harada. And he said, like, at one point he said, I hate to take credit for it, but I think I came up with the idea for 2 weeks. And it seems like he could give that disclaimer, I hate to take credit for it, for a lot of things. And, he seemed to like be really influential and kind of just envision things ahead of time, including Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe's divorce, which is a funny story. But it seems like it's like, I didn't know too much about him other than his name. And like, I was really impressed, like, how big his reach and influence was in Japanese baseball. Could you speak a little bit to that? And is there anyone that you can come up with, like maybe in American baseball or other sports, that is something that can compare to him to convey like how important he is to the Japanese game?
Well, Cappy was Cappy. Cappy was very good at self-promotion. And now, 15 years later, I'm not exactly sure how many of Cappy's stories are completely true. But he was there. It's wonderful once you knew him and you go back at old magazines of any of the tours. There's the star, there's Joe DiMaggio, there's Robin Roberts, Eddie Matthews, and behind them, there's Cappy Harada's face in the dugout or holding their shoulder and directing them. So he was very influential. He was the go-between between the Japanese league and the teams. As terms of American, I just can't say. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that's interesting. Well, don't feel bad if he fooled you, because it fooled me too then.
He's got books written in him, biographies in Japanese written about him. So he certainly was influential. I wish I could find out the true stories.
Yeah. Maybe like a Bill Veck or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really liked the Brad Leslie, the animal chapter, Rob. He was I wish I could have seen him play in person. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience was interacting with him, and was he as interesting to deal with in your interviews as he was in the book and on the field?
He was. He was a trip. When I explained this in the introduction, but these are the players' words. So what I did is, the method was, after I made contact, I'd set up a time to do an interview. I'd have about 20 to 30 questions I would ask them, and everything was taped. And then I would transcript the entire interview. I would then go back, take out my questions, and mold the transcript into a discussion as if they were talking directly to the speaker. So parts would be dropped off, parts would be combined, and then I'd send it back to the player for their approval. And not all players liked it. Some of them loved it, some of them hated it. Most of them were, okay, we're just gonna fix this and that. So I call up the animal, and I said, so, Brad, what do you think about it? What should we change? He's like, well, yeah, man, I don't speak like that. And I know we have some kids out there, so I'm going to watch my language here and not tell exactly what the animal was telling me. But animal's like, look what you said. You say, I think you said, I say, oh, shucks at some time. He goes, I've never said, oh, shucks in my life. And if you print that, all my friends are going to laugh at me and just razz me about that for years. You can't print, oh, shucks. And I want you to print what I really said. And I said, I can't print that. Obviously there was an F word, at least every sentence. There was a lot more explicit language than just that word. And we compromised on shit. And so that shows up a few times in his interview. But that was a fun but real debate we had before he finally approved his chapter.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you made it kid friendly because this is a good book for kids' educational purposes. But yeah, I guess shit is a good compromise. Ray, we got you.
Hey, Robert, greetings from Yokohama.
All right.
Good to see you again. Hey, in all the different book signings that you did, okay, which do you think was the most interesting book signing? What was the most, whether humorous or most informative, or who is the most unique person at these book signings that that you can remember? I've been to a couple of them with you, so New York, Washington, also here in Yokohama. So I was just curious, which did you find was the most interesting?
I think that's a good question. I guess for me, the most interesting one was one we did on the Mashi tour in Fresno, California. When we did the Mashi tour, I brought Mashi over from Tokyo. We arrived in Chicago for the SABR conference. And we did a talk together at SABR. Then we flew to Boston and did the Japan Society in Boston. My car was in Boston. We drove to New York. We spoke at the Japan Society. I think it was Japan Society, New York. Then we drove to Cooperstown. The next day, we spoke Cooperstown, drove back to New York. I think we had a second day in New York. We could jump on the plane. Yuriko Romer met us for this. We flew to Los Angeles, spoke 3 days in Los Angeles, drove to Fresno and San Francisco. This is all in 2 weeks, no days off. Mashi was 70 and he was exhausted by the end of this. So I had this choreographed fairly tightly, and I knew about how many people were coming to each event. And there was only one that I didn't have control of, and that was Fresno. And it was going to be at the Buddhist temple in Fresno, in basically the gymnasium. I was just like, all right, this is going to be a disaster, but we have to get from LA to San Francisco. We're driving, it's halfway. So if 5 people show up, we'll go out to dinner afterwards and we'll have a good time. We had, I don't know, 150, 200 people there. The line for autographs was going on for hours. Everybody went to talk to Mashi. It was just amazing. Lee Ron Lee showed up. He lives in Sacramento, and he just came in and started shaking hands and gave Mashi a big hug and started talking to us, and it was a wonderful night. So I think that was my favorite one because I was expecting so little.
That's awesome. That sounds really fun. Susan, we're going to go back to you.
Thanks. So Rob, one more question. Since it's been 15 years since you published Remembering, who of the MPB players who have retired in the last 15 years, who would you like to include in volume 2?
Oh, wow. Wow. No, I've never given that any thought. I'm going to have to come up with somebody I know. Of the Americans, I met Matt Merton of the Hanshin Tigers at Chicago Cubs. I know we have fans of both teams here. I met him about 2 months ago at an event, and he is amazing. He's such a smart guy. He loves Japanese baseball history. He's read almost everything there is on it. I would like to include him and talk to him about his experiences. He would probably be one of the most interesting Americans. Of course, there's Tuffy Rhodes, who I'd want to talk to. And I'd like to talk to a lot of the Japanese who came here to play in the majors, but especially the ones who didn't make it, especially the ones who thought they were going to come over here and have a career and fizzled out. And I'd love it if they would honestly talk about the differences and why it didn't work out.
So we'll add Kei Igawa to the list.
Oh yeah, poor guy. Yes.
Michael Westbay suggests Rob Deere.
Oh yes. but that was over pretty fast, wasn't it? What I found, so I probably interviewed about 30 to 35 guys for what I did remembering. And a lot of the interviews were very short, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Ugh, hated it there. Never got used to the food. Everybody spoke Japanese. You know, I never was able to hit the pitching. The umps were horrible. What else do you want to know? I had like 3 interviews like that. I was like, oh, okay, nice talking to you. Hang up as quickly as you can. I don't think, I'm pretty sure by the end I included only people who had a positive experience for the most part in Japan. Partly because I was a fan of Japanese baseball. I didn't want anybody to, just ragging on the game, but also because they weren't very interesting when all they did was complain about it. So I would think I'd stay away from Rob Deere.
Yeah, it seems like there's like, it's either with the American guys, and I'm sure you left out the ones that are really bad, but you're either kind of bitter and dumbfounded by the whole experience, or you rolled with the punches and you really embraced it and had an amazing time. And it's interesting that, you know, obviously you talked to some of the biggest stars as far as the Americans that went over there, and they're all guys that really were able to make, you know, Ron Lee obviously really stood out, and he helped others on how to adapt. And like, I think a lot of us on the call here who have been to Japan or go on tours or live there as expats, like they all can relate. Like, you can try to live your own life, you know, try to create your own American life in Japan, or you can really embrace it, and the on-field performance really correlates to how much you embrace that, which is a pretty interesting thing.
I mean, that's definitely right. I think we all know that there's very few Americans who did well and hated it. It's usually, you know, the guys who may not have been big stars over here in the U.S. who went in there and managed to adapt well, and their full talents were able to come out.
Yeah. Gabe makes a good point. He says the disgruntled Gaijin players already had their say, and you got to have wa. So you're giving the positive, the positive view. So that's
I didn't
good.
Put this in the introduction because Bob Whiting wrote the preface, but when I started this book, it was to disprove wa.
Nice.
I played on a Japanese baseball team, a company team, for 2 years in Japan, and my experience was nothing like wa at all. They didn't practice particularly hard. I was kind of begging them to get out in the field and play, please. I hadn't practiced, and they're sitting there smoking cigarettes and drinking beer in the dugout, and supposedly semi-serious. So I'm like, you know, wa's BS. It's just, you know, Whiting, I hadn't met him yet. I said, yeah, he's out there to sell a book. You know, it's nonsense. And then I started talking, and I talked to Wally. And Wally Yonamine, you know, his story it comes up in wa, but he's not the typical Gaijin that's focused on in wa. So then I start talking to the players, especially the players that Bob Whiting focused on, like the Lee brothers and Animal. And it's like, wow, you know, wa's right on. Not only is it a good read, but it's accurate. The stories are accurate. The players are accurate. But of course, it was written in the 1980s. And so things transform over time.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, you bring up a lot of good points there. But I think, it kind of evolved. And it's interesting also in the farther back you go with the American guys, the less leniency the Japanese teams had in them doing their own thing. And I think both sides have kind of met in the middle a little bit now, it seems like.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump over to Richard Gerwitz because he had an interesting story. Hey, Richard, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Rob, you talked about retired players, and I was going to ask you as a Tigers fan to compare Gene Bach and Randy Messenger. Randy Messenger, I think, would be a good guy to interview, for the next book. And I think I heard last year in an interview with Randy Messenger that Gene Bach actually contacted him at one time. I was curious if you had heard about that, but just to compare the two guys, because they do have some similarities with, being big guys and so forth.
You know, I'm not going to be able to answer this really good question because I stopped following modern Japanese baseball around 2008, 2010 until just a few years ago. So I don't know Messenger. I've never spoken to him. I didn't watch him play. I know who he is, of course. I have his baseball cards, but I can't give you a really good analysis of the differences or similarities between the two players. I'm sorry about that.
Does anyone out there have a take on that question? Can we crowdsource that answer?
Where's Trevor when you need him?
Yeah, exactly. Trevor is Trevor has one class a week, and it's right now, unfortunately, that he has to teach. So unfortunately, Trevor can't join us, but he probably would at least be able to come up with an answer, even if he doesn't know. Okay, we're gonna jump over to Jenny. Hey, Jenny.
Hello. There's actually really good timing based on the question that you just asked. It contextualizes my question that's coming in a moment, but I was actually just reading an article 2 days ago that was talking about Bach and Messenger because of my university class that I'm teaching about international baseball. We're in the Japanese baseball unit, and one of my students is doing a research paper on Randy Messenger. And apparently the article was saying that Bach randomly sent a message, like a letter to Messenger, and he got it, and he's like, who is this person? I've never heard of it. And then he looked him up and found out that it was like the other extremely well celebrated, decorated pitcher in Hanshin history. And they kind of developed a letter writing relationship from there. So I can add that to the conversation, but that's the extent of my knowledge. But it was a really interesting article. If I can dig out the link, I'll share it in the chat for you guys.
Please.
Where do you
my question actually is actually related to the class that I'm teaching. And full disclosure, I did not read the current book that this book club is about, kind of discussions about, but I'm in the middle of reading Issei Baseball, and I'm really enjoying it. So thank you very much for that fascinating part that I'd not heard about before.
Thank you.
It got me thinking about something for my course that I'm teaching, and at the moment, it's about international baseball, and I want them to sort of learn about sort of the cultural differences. You know, of course, baseball is the same, the sport's the same, but the game is different in every country. And what I want them to learn about Japanese baseball is to really appreciate the team cultures and things like that. But I also realize with my students, I have 11 students, 6 of whom are diehard baseball fans, 5 of whom have never set foot in a stadium and never watched a game. And I'd like to hear your take on what is something, because I want them to engage with the sport in their own country that maybe something they're not aware of. What is something that you, or someone, or something about Japanese baseball that you think Japanese fans should know that maybe they don't know about, that doesn't get enough, doesn't get enough of a spotlight shined on it?
So something that, as a foreign scholar of Japanese baseball, I can tell a Japanese fan about their own game.
Well, what is something that you have found through your studies that you think maybe Japanese fans either maybe don't know about or maybe don't appreciate because maybe it doesn't stand out as unique or interesting enough to them, but coming at it from a different perspective, it's maybe worth exploring? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So off the top of my head, this is one of these I'm going to lie in bed tonight and come up with an answer. But of course, one is the fans themselves, the cheering group, the more organized things. That's very Japanese. It's not, it's not going to work completely in the United States, even if we tried. But I think they probably know that. But that's something that's unique to Japanese baseball that's really special. As I mentioned before, right now, I actually find the Japanese game to be far more exciting than the U.S. game. I was watching the Pacific League, I think highlights at that opening day, and I don't know how many stolen base attempts I saw. Like 3, 4, or I was like, you'd be lucky to see 3 and 4 in an entire day of 30 games in the U.S. So that's something I really like, and I think we can learn from them again right now. One of the things that's always struck me when I'm in Japan is I think the average Japanese fan does not appreciate their history. Certainly when I lived there in 93, 94, the books on the history of Japanese baseball were often old. They were written by guys who had long since passed away. They were written in the 50s, early 60s. There wasn't much going on. There's a lot more going on now. When you go to the bookstore, you see books about Sadahara Nagashima, the stars of the 70s, but I see very little about the 30s, the 50s, the 19th century, outside of academic circles. And I think it'd be nice if they started to develop a better appreciation of their own history.
Okay. Wow, that's really, that's very interesting. Yeah, because I think regarding the cultural, like the fan cheering and those sorts of things, I did actually have them do all of that. They've been sort of researching and presenting, and they're comparing, like, what do you learn about this region based on what this fandom does or how they act and things like that. And which I think is a really fascinating element. But I'm trying to think about the history, because I want them to discover there's interesting stories in here, and I want them to find them and then learn how to talk about them in English. So thank you very much. That's a really, really helpful answer for me. I appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah, that was a nice job coming up with that one after being put on the spot. Gabe said ballpark food is better. So that's one.
Yes.
And Leon says the lucky seventh. I have one too that maybe, Jenny, it's not applicable to you. I'm not sure how old your students are, but you can bring your own beer into the ballpark in Japan. That is something that any Japanese fan should appreciate, because that is unfathomable and definitely in the U.S. and probably other parts of the world. So that would be my vote for that one. Does anyone else out there have a am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
But I'm not sure about New York.
Oh.
Yeah, the same thing at Rogers Center. You can bring in your own food. There's one person on Twitter who brought in a full charcuterie board and said, really, if you're not bringing charcuterie to the ball game, what are you even doing?
You could bring in food in Baltimore, Camden Yards. You could bring in food at Nationals Park. I find that most ballparks you can.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think you can do food in most parks, but not the beer unless you put it in your sock or something. So I think I cut out there for a second. But Gabe, I heard you talking, but did you have something else to say? I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to discuss a little bit more on like the Issei baseball, and I wanted to ask Rob if you had any contact with the members of the Vancouver Asahi team and how popular they were before the internment camp started. They actually had a Heritage Minute released by the Canadian government last year with Kei Kamanishi, the last surviving member, portraying a role in that Heritage Minute. I wanted to hear if you reached out to them or were able to speak with them on your research.
I did not. They're very well known. Of course, they have, I think, 1 or 2 movies about them, including one in Japanese. A number of books about them, some written a long time ago, 20 years ago, and some very recent. They're too late for me. What I was interested in were the very beginnings of Japanese American baseball. And I was specifically interested in one group of players who started in Los Angeles, whose records I had the most knowledge of. I could have also focused on Seattle and written the book with a Seattle focus. I mentioned the Seattle teams, but I don't focus on them. So the fellows that I focus on from LA went on to form the first professional Japanese baseball team, and then a second professional team in 1911. The first one's 1906. So that's why I had the LA focus and never went past World War I, except in the final chapter of the book.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. What are you holding up, Michael? You holding up the Asahi book in Japanese?
This is the Tokyo Giants North American Tour of 1935. And this covers a lot of those. The Tokyo Giants in 1935 visited Los Angeles and a lot of the Nisei teams there. And Vancouver is also covered in this book. Naturally, it's in Japanese, so that's one of the possible drawbacks for most of the people here. But Nakata Yoichi has written several really good books that all were spawned after this one, based on various people that he talked to in the U.S. And one of them was an internment camp one, which I loved. That was such an amazing book. I visited my old hometown, Hanford, California, a couple years ago. And one of the places I wanted to go to was the Babe Ruth field, which was named after one of the players in the book, which it is just so amazing, the history that we didn't learn in school. And Nakata Yoichi has really done a lot of the research in North America with these Nisei teams, and he's written a lot about them over the past few years. So if you can read Japanese, I highly recommend his books.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Yoichi is amazing, by the way. Michael's not making that up. You will find him acknowledged prominently in every one of my books. He's the guy.
Rob, are you able to read Japanese?
No, I can read baseball cards, names, some stats. When I'm doing my research in Japanese, I can often figure out this is the article I need to hire someone to translate for me. Occasionally I'm wrong. I bring it home and it's about somebody's birthday party, but usually I can kind of figure out this is what I need to have somebody who can read look at it.
Got it. Yeah, that must make it a little bit complicated.
Yeah,
being a Japanese baseball historian, but
it's a problem. It really is.
Yeah. Well, we all appreciate the hard work you put into that. I think a number of people have more collecting questions, so we'll go to Bob again, and then Robert, we'll go to you.
Oh,
there you are.
Well, Rob and I met in the 1990s, and Rob gave me the addresses of some of the greatest Hall of Famers. So I want to share just a quick story that was amazing. I wrote to Tetsuharu Kawakami and Kaneda and a couple other people. I got replies from Kawakami. I asked him a question in my request for an autograph. I asked him, I knew he had played with Joe DiMaggio in 1951. When I played with that, he met him. I had photographs of him and Joe DiMaggio. So I asked Kawakami, did you learn anything from Joe DiMaggio? And his reply was, Joe taught me to hit for doubles. He said, swing for doubles, because if you hit the ball well, you'll get a double. And if you hit the ball really well, you'll get a home run. And I just wanted to share that little story with everyone about learning from an American player. That's it.
That's cool. I think that approach to hitting is disappearing by the minute in the States. But
yeah, I guess it's hit for home runs. And if you don't hit the home run, you get a strikeout.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't hit a home run, you'll get 1 out of the next 5 a home run, I guess is their approach. Yeah, that's cool that he responded to you. Robert Kiyoshi, you're going to go back to you.
Okay. Sorry. I have 2 questions. One is throughout the years, whenever I ran into Japanese fans, they're so surprised about Japanese baseball cards. A lot of them didn't know they existed until BBM, Baseball Magazine. And like, what's the response? Are you getting Have you showed any Japanese your book, and are they surprised?
Not somebody who's not within like our circles, who already collects, and they're not surprised. I did have somebody, Fuji, right? Who
Fuji.
some of you may know, volunteered to translate the newest book into Japanese. So we'll see how that goes, and if we're lucky, we'll get a Japanese edition out there, and we'll see what Japanese people think about this. But yeah, Menko are they're not skashi for people probably older than I am in Japan, because back in the 50s they would be playing these, but they weren't so popular in the late 60s and 70s. So you kind of the collecting base of vintage Japanese baseball cards is almost exclusively in the United States.
So, Fuji are you talking about Fuchan?
Takumi Fujitsuka, he helps us with our tours sometimes, and knows a bunch of the people on the call here, but he's in Nara.
Okay. Okay. The other question is, do you recognize can you see these cards?
Yes. If you hold it up, I'll say yes. Yes, I know those.
Here, I'm gonna put you on the spotlight again. Hold them up again, Robert.
Okay, I got two of them. Look, I think it's a college card.
Yep, it's from 1929. These are the first. You want to hold up the other one? The same set? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. These are from 1929, and they're the first identified set that shows individual players from Japan. So before that, most of the time you're dealing with kind of generic cards. But this is the first set that it's all players are identified. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's in the guide, and I can certainly, it's in my book too, actually, because I feature it.
Really? I'm going to get the book.
Here we go. Since I've got everybody's attention here, there it is. And I'll show you that. I'll tell you the name of the card. There are the cards right there. I don't know if you guys can see it. I can't see what you see. But there's your set right here. And it's the 1929. I'm going to butcher the Japanese because I do not speak it, as you know. Nichiedo Saika.
Oh, man.
So there you go.
Thank you.
That's cool, Robert. Where did you get those?
I traded these two for 3 Kabaya Leafs in the 90s.
Nice. Classic trade there. That's
and like,
cool.
I don't know, I kind of miss those Kabaya Leafs, but I think these are more, yeah.
Well, that's a pretty unique thing. That's cool. We're going to go back to, thanks for that, Robert. We're going to go back to Richard Gerwitz, and then Yumi, we'll go to you after that.
Hi, Rob, I'll apologize ahead of time. This is probably an unfair question. I'm a big fan of Japanese movies and TV series. The one thing, though, that strikes me odd is that for a country that's in love with baseball, it seems like the only baseball movies or TV shows that I've seen from Japan are mostly about high school baseball. And there was one, I hold it up, this is called I Will Buy You, which was a Kobayashi movie from 1956, and that was about the old Osaka Tigers. But we have a lot of baseball movies in this country. And I've even asked some, when being on the JapanBall tour, I've asked some Japanese that spoke good English why there isn't more movies about professional baseball over there. Do you have any thoughts on that at all, or have you ever heard anything?
I'm going to just hazard a guess here. First of all, there were, at least in the 50s and 60s, a number of like player biography movies. There was an O movie, a Nagashima movie, a Kawakami movie, you know, just out there to promote the players. As it turns to classic movies, you know, for a long time, professional sports in Japan was kind of looked down upon. The idea that sports should be amateur, they should be pure, And to play for money sullied the sport, and sullied the right adjective for it is, well, you get the idea. Words escape me there. So I'm just kind of hazard a guess here that the amateur game, especially the high school game, is a better subject for a movie in many Japanese movie producers, movie writers' eyes. And that might be why. There is a book that came out last year. I don't remember the name of it in English, and it's about Japanese baseball novels and Japanese baseball movies. It's from a fellow who teaches in Taiwan. It's a kind of expensive academic book, but I'm sure Shane can give you my contact information and I can find it on the bookshelf later.
Okay, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense what you said, because this movie, I Will Buy You, is about the corruption of an athlete and how he is almost thrown out of his own family, basically, for trying to take too much money and so forth and so on. So that's probably the best explanation I've ever heard. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a good call. And on the subject of films, there's also I just was reading about it. It's in Japanese, but it sounded pretty interesting. The story, maybe someone here can remind me his name, but he's a player in the war times that was a kamikaze pilot and died in a kamikaze mission. And there's a movie about him. Yeah, it actually wasn't about Eiji, as I know Eiji was also one of those guys, and he also died in the war. So yes, Susan, but there's, I can't recall the name of this guy specifically.
Yeah, and I can't either, but it's a famous movie.
Is it Nishimura?
Yeah. Nishimura, yeah, I think that sounds right. Yeah. So that would be an interesting one too. If you just
Yukio Nishimura.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. But Richard, if you Google Japanese kamikaze, something like that, I'm sure the movie will come up. Or if you contact me, I can let you know. I was just looking at it the other day. And it's also a good time to plug, just for all of you, on Monday ESPN is showing a documentary called Koshien about the Koshien tournament. And it's on primetime on ESPN on Monday night. So that's a big spotlight for Japanese baseball. And it looks like a really cool documentary. Jonathan Greenberg gave me the heads up on that. So Jonathan, actually, are you still on the call? Yeah, I'm going to go to you, Jonathan. You've seen the movie. I'm sure other people have, but can you let us know a little bit about that one?
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie by a young filmmaker named Emma Ryan Yamazaki. And it's just an incredible film. It goes through a year or a season in the life of an actual team, high school team, and talks about what the significance of it as far as in terms of Japanese culture today, and it's a lot of interviews with the coaches and the players, and it's just a beautifully done film with a lot of drone shots that are just really breathtaking, and it's really an amazing film. It really captures the power and the importance of Koshien to Japan.
Well, yeah, it sounds great. I'm sure Americans will love it, and maybe that's one in the future for one of these episodes that we all watch and talk about, because there'd be a fun discussion for this group, and maybe Emma could come on.
I do know Emma.
Oh, you know her, Ian? Yeah.
Yeah, we actually met in Seattle, and she had this project for Yahoo called Dear Ichiro, and you can look it up. And all the interviews are in Japanese, but I was actually featured in one of them talking about me being an Ichiro fan, and she's a great filmmaker, and I could, if you don't know her, I could ask, and I'm sure she would be willing to chat with us.
Cool. Yeah, it'd be good to connect with her. And Jenny's asking the group if Koshien's available anywhere else. I'm not sure. I was looking, I couldn't really find, but that's if anyone knows, let us, let me know, and that'd be something I would just send out to our email list too. This would be a good one, just to let everyone know because of our common interest. Yumi, you've been waiting for a while, so I'll go to you now.
Okay.
Hi, Yumi. Good to see you.
Actually, I was a cheerleader at Koshien when I was in high school. That was my dream. I was not a boy, so I could not really dream of going to Koshien playing baseball. But my dream came true as a cheerleader. Anyway, and also this is Vancouver Asahi hat that older friend of mine gave it to me. His father's side of the family are Japanese Canadian, and my friend's uncle was one of the team, the Asahi team, and a pretty big role in a Vancouver Asahi, the film that they made a couple of years ago. So I had some. He gave it to me. Anyway, I was born and raised in Japan. I probably saw one professional baseball when I was there, and I kind of like shifted to Koshien and then MLB. And 2 years ago, I was in Japan during the summertime. I went to see Japanese baseball, and I was very fascinated. It's kind of like I should have known better, but it was totally new world for me. And I've seen a difference between MLB and NPB. But anyway, the question is that you have written a couple of books about Japanese baseball. Any of the Japanese publisher are interested in translating the books, or anything to collaborate with any baseball, field, anything?
Mm-hmm. The book Banzai Babe Ruth, which features the 1934 tour of Japan, is in Japanese. It has a slightly different title. I'm not actually sure what the Japanese title is. You can get it on Amazon JP. And I have an agent who is looking to sell the rights both to Mashi and also to Issei Baseball, which is the newest one. And hopefully I'll get lucky. But right now it seems to be kind of a tough sell for Japanese baseball books about the history of the game.
Do you want to connect with, I think right now the Japanese baseball world is not quite an NPB, but also a YouTuber. There's a couple YouTubers in Japan. They have so much followers. And one of the YouTubers at the group, they are now managing independent league. So I think they're changing the world of baseball over there. And maybe you should hook up with them and then be introduced in a large org, because I think NPB, they are very typical, stubborn, and it's really hard to change. But I think a YouTuber who are following, and also the younger, the kids are watching them. I think that's the trend.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
I will keep sending Japanese messages to them and then collaborate or something. Yeah. But I'll keep you, to check your website and to see if there's the translation or anything like that. And I'd like to. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Yumi. Rob, one question I saw in the chat, and also just a heads up, everyone, we're at over an hour and a half now, so I'm gonna wrap things up. If anyone has any more questions, raise your hand virtually or put it in the chat, and we'll get to you before we end things here. But right now there's like a big boom in baseball cards in the U.S. It's having a kind of a second life or third life, whatever you want to call it. Has that translated to Japanese baseball cards at all, like whether American collectors or I guess Japanese collectors as well?
Yeah, and the newer ones are very popular there. If you go to a baseball card, sports card store in Japan, they will be selling American cards and modern Japanese cards. There'll be no vintage Japanese cards there. Nothing at all earlier than, say, 1970. And you're even lucky to get the ones from the 70s in these shops. So yeah, the current cards have parallel sets and insert sets and autographs and it's not in reach, but I just got a autographed Mashi card in the mail yesterday. It was released this year. It's a a retro card, shows him in his uniform from the 70s, and it's one of, I think, 10 or something like that. So it's real parallel development in Japan right now.
And are Americans showing any interest in Japanese card that's increased at all?
Sure, there's a handful.
Yeah.
But not that many, yeah.
The handful that are on this call, maybe.
Yes. Is Dave, are you here? Dave McNeely?
He was.
Do I see him? I see him waving. Yeah, he's the man. He's the expert.
Yeah, I think when you, hey Dave, hey Dave. It says NPV card guy as his avatar there, or his name. So I think that says it all. Good to see you, Dave. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions here. So, a huge thanks to you, Rob. This was awesome. Like, we threw all sorts of questions at you, and you had an answer for all of them. So, nice job handling that. And speaking of which, the one question from Jenny that you kind of talked about the history of the game. I just wanted there's one part in the book that I wanted to point out from Masaki Mori's chapter, which, by the way, this book has been really helpful for me because it's really helped me improve my Japanese baseball history knowledge. And a guy like Mori, is someone I didn't really know much about, but I definitely feel like after reading it, I should have, and now I know. And, the guy has 25 championships or something, and I don't think anyone in any sport in any country in the world can compete with that. And he's just one of the ultimate winners in the history of athletics, really. So I'm really happy that you made this accessible to people like me. But in Mori's chapter, he said, the spirit of respecting the history of baseball that causes people to go to Cooperstown in the U.S. does not exist in Japan, nor does the desire to leave stories for the next generation. I think it's very sad that Japanese youth don't know about most former players, but the fact that most current pro baseball players in Japan don't know about the people who created the history of baseball, I think, is a tragedy. People today don't know who Mr. Mizuhara was or who Mr. Mihara was. Most of the players themselves don't know who Mr. Tsuruoka was. I had a 20-year career with the Giants, but if I went back to the Giants, most of the players wouldn't know that I had played for the team. And that's kind of amazing. And I'm sure that exists in American baseball too, to an extent, but it's kind of amazing that that's the case, and it's too bad that's the culture. So I think I speak for all of us, and I say I appreciate the work that you've done with this book and with all the other books you've done to preserve that history where, in American baseball is there's an obsession with the baseball history, and when I asked everyone what their favorite baseball book is, you could have 40 different people with 40 different answers, and they'd all be good answers. And so I really appreciate, especially obviously in the English language, making it accessible to us. So we're all rooting for you, and keep pushing those books out, and we'll have you on to talk about them.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for joining us again. I hope to see you all. Like I said, most likely July 9th will be the next one to talk with Yuriko and her film, which Rob also plays a big role in. And we may have Sandy Alderson before that. Most likely it will be after. But we look forward to seeing you all then. That's all I had. These are the last, couple. There we go. Yeah, just for those of you who are on the call for the first time, find us online. There's our social media. Please follow us. If you're not on our newsletter, let me know, Shane@JapanBall.com. I'd like to add you to our newsletter, and find us on those websites. And then I have to be shameless about this. We're selling gift cards for our tours. I appreciate anyone who's able or willing to, that knows they want to go on a tour in the future, or has a family member that wants to. It's basically just an advance on a tour payment, helping us keep things going while we're not having tours. So I just wanted to plug that. Thanks to all of you. Some of you on the call have bought them. I really appreciate that. And that's a wrap. I'll stay on for a little bit. I have to go maybe in 10 minutes or so, but if anybody has any questions or anything they want to just chat, I'm happy to talk. Otherwise, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.